Hello and welcome to episode 245 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. I'm going to be flying solo on the show today as I do another episode in my running series on former Disney chairman and CEO Michael Eisner. Last month, when Disney caved to political pressure in a cowardly way, Michael Eisner jumped on Twitter and slammed the company. Eisner, who has remained quiet on pretty much all of the controversial decisions made by his successor Bob Iger and even his other successor Bob Chapek, knew that you can't stay neutral on a moving train, and he spoke up for freedom of speech. It actually reminded me of a time during his tenure when fringe groups threatened to boycott Disney if they didn't back down on doing what was right. And Michael Eisner stood his ground that time as well. On the show today, we're going to talk about Eisner's courage last month and his willingness to stand up for what was right when it had the ability to cost him money. I would also like to start the show with a review of my hotel room from my recent visit to Walt Disney World. There's actually a lot I want to say about the hotel, its staff, and its proximity to the parks that might help you for the next time you decide to stay off property on a Walt Disney World vacation. Before we get started, we're coming up on two really big milestones. Next month, we will hit our 250th episode of the Tall Guy Talks Travel podcast, and in the early part of the new year, we will hit 5 years of airing new episodes each and every week. Both of these achievements are big deals. The one area where we have been stagnant, however, has been with the number of subscribers we have on the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel. Considering the fact that we have been getting more viewers per episode than we have averaged for most of our run, I would really like to see that subscriber count rise. We sometimes get 4 times as many listeners to the podcast as we have subscribers on the YouTube channel. Please do me a favor and click the subscribe button on our YouTube channel. Do it right now. It is free and it takes like 30 seconds. Everybody who already is subscribed, please make sure you check out all of our videos. Like the videos and podcasts, and drop positive comments whenever you like something. We've been experimenting with different types of videos, and I'm working on an entirely new YouTube channel that I hope will interest many of you. It will be much easier for me to keep you up to date if you are subscribed. Recently, I have posted videos from my return to Walt Disney World in September, videos from Pittsburgh and Baltimore, and a set of videos that covers my recent visit to the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. I have so many videos saved from my last time in Florida that I have Walt Disney World content scheduled years in advance on the channel. That is not at all an exaggeration. Years in advance, I have this stuff scheduled for you. Plus, we have some really fun topics planned for the podcast. Make sure you are subscribed, and of course, tell a friend. All right, with that out of the way, I want to start today's show with a review of my hotel from my recent stay in the Orlando area. This was my second time staying at the Fairfield Inn on South Apopka Vineland Road. This hotel is just a few blocks from the entrance to Disney Springs on the eastern side of property. Without staying on property, this location is probably about as close to the Disney bubble as anything else off property. I was still on my annual pass, so I had free parking at the parks, but you may need to take an Uber or a Lyft. Still, if you are getting a good deal on the hotel, even parking at the parks would not make that big of a price difference compared to staying even at a value resort. In fact, considering that the room comes with a free hot breakfast every morning, I would say that would probably be enough to pay for your parking every day. Certainly, if you were planning on buying breakfast in the parks, it would be much cheaper to get the free breakfast and pay the $35 a day to park at the parks. But even if you were going to do something like with a family of 4, you were going to buy food at a convenience store or at a grocery store, you're still looking at about $35 a morning, I'm pretty sure, to get a good hearty breakfast. But there you're getting it for free at the hotel, and that makes a big difference. Actually, let's start with that breakfast. We aren't just talking about a continental breakfast of cereal and oatmeal. Yes, they have cereal, oatmeal, bagels, toast, fruit, and other basic items. My favorite part was the make-your-own waffle stands. They had 3 separate machines that make Mickey-shaped waffles. That is such a nice touch to make you feel like you're a part of the magic, even though you are off property. It was also impressive to have one employee dedicated to serving scrambled eggs, potatoes, bacon, and sausages. That employee was not there to be cheap with the food either. When I was there, he was very generous with the portions. The breakfast was served from 6:30 until 9:30 every morning. This means that you can get there at 6:30 and still be able to make it to an 8 o'clock rope drop at Disney's Animal Kingdom. That's the earliest you're going to have to be in one of the theme parks, and I think you could make it if you hurried on those particular mornings. The parking situation at the resort is a little bit of an issue. The hotel shares a parking lot with a strip mall, and there are designated areas for hotel guests. This was never even close to a problem the week I was there, but I was there during the downtime of late September. Had this been a busier time of year, I could have foreseen an issue with having enough spots. That being said, I'm also sure that the staff has dealt with that situation in the past and would have an answer in some form or fashion. Having that strip mall there, however, is such a huge benefit. There's a Wawa convenience store and gas station in the parking lot that is a really big deal. You can order fresh-made food at Wawa 24/7. So if you come back from an after-hours event at Magic Kingdom that goes until 1 a.m., you can get hot food at this Wawa at 2 a.m. if you want. Of course, having a gas station without having to get back on the main roads is nice, especially when you are leaving if you drove down to Florida. That means you can get a nice full tank of gas to get you on your way. If you have a rental, it is probably close enough to the drop that you could fill up there before returning it at the airport. There is a Chinese buffet in the strip mall, which I ate at with my mother a few years ago, and we absolutely loved it. If they kept up the quality, you will definitely want to take the time to do that if you're having a rest day. There's a Pizza Hut and an Indian place. Right across the street, there is a Chili's, and half a block from that is an Olive Garden. My trip was during Never Ending Pasta Bowl. My friend Jillian and I decided to get our dinner there instead of in any of the parks. I had unlimited salad, breadsticks, pasta, and refillable sodas for less than it costs for a small lunch at Columbia Harbor House in Magic Kingdom. I know that a lot of people don't like to hit chain restaurants when on vacation, and I get that. Disney Springs was still less than a mile drive from the hotel. Still, sometimes when you're on vacation, you have to find a way to fit in a cheap meal, and sometimes it's easier for parents to take kids to a few places during a trip where the kids already know the menu and what they like to order. Finally, there is a Dollar Tree in the strip mall, and that is huge. If you forgot a toothbrush, needed some tape or glue, or found yourself short of any number of other small items, you can get them at Dollar Tree for cheap. As for the room itself, I got really lucky on this trip. My room was on the second floor, directly above the lobby. This meant that with the design of the entrance, I had a longer room by about 5 feet. This doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a huge deal in practice. I still had the same amount of furniture, so I used that extra space to spread out my electronics and suitcase. The beds were incredibly comfortable, and the room was immaculate in cleanliness. The only issue I had with the room itself was that the shower was an older style. like something you would find in an apartment in the 90s. It was very slippery without any traction. There also wasn't a bathroom fan, so someone like me who likes to crank up the hot water and let it just scald my back until I forget how hard I went in the parks that day, it meant that the room would get super stuffy and would still be kind of damp even when I returned to the hotel at night. The air conditioning was incredible, on point. One of the things I love to do when I'm on vacation is just crank up the AC and then cuddle in the blankets. And that was something that I was able to do pretty easily with the AC. The hotel cost me less than $80 per night, although I have seen it as high as $250 per night for a single night in the busy season. I would say that depending on the time of year, $80 to $150 per night would be a reasonable price to pay for a room at this resort. This is the closest you can stay to the Disney bubble while also having access to some of the best aspects of staying off property. Once again, that is the Fairfield Inn on South Apopka Vineland. Now I would like to move on to the main topic of today's episode. On September 10th, conservative commentator Charlie Kirk was shot and killed in Utah while on a tour of college campuses. The killing was met with a number of reactions throughout the United States and even abroad. While the overwhelming majority of people from all political affiliations condemned the shooting before even knowing anything about the politics of the shooter, something that we really still don't know for sure, there were some people, mostly on social media, who celebrated Kirk's death. Kirk, who had some pretty far-right views, was loved by many conservatives, especially older generations, who saw him as a younger voice who could potentially reach younger generations. The vacuum of information about the shooter, combined with the already decisive nature of U.S. politics, and seeing some people celebrate the death, caused many conservatives to be looking for people saying the wrong things. I'm not here to talk about Charlie Kirk. This isn't that type of podcast. We're here to talk about positives and to foster an environment of inclusivity. As somebody who worked in news broadcasting in the past, I use my best neutral speak for that last paragraph. It is important, however, to remember exactly how tense things were just a few weeks ago in the United States. That was the vibe on September 15th when Jimmy Kimmel went on his show, Jimmy Kimmel Live, and talked about some of the divisions that were widening after the shooting. Kimmel said, quote, "We hit some new lows over the weekend, with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them, and doing everything they can to score political points from it. In a tactic that has become far too common in the last 10 years, those who wanted Jimmy Kimmel to say something offensive twisted his words around in their heads until they found something offensive. If you read the words that Kimmel actually said without adding any of your own context, it is plain to see that he was saying that conservatives were trying to claim that the shooter was not a conservative. Well, that's 100% true. They were trying to say that. As a matter of fact, we still don't know a ton about the shooter, who I will not be mentioning by name in this podcast, because I don't believe in giving attention seekers who resort to violence the attention they desire. This led to FCC Chairman Brendan Carr going on a right-wing podcast and saying, quote, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct and take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead." Carr added that Kimmel, quote, "appeared to be making an intentional effort to mislead the public that Kirk's assassin was a right-wing Trump supporter. This statement is absolutely ludicrous on a number of levels. First, it may have appeared to Carr that Kimmel was trying to do something, but that's irrelevant. Nobody's actions or words can be judged through somebody else's perspective. If Kimmel was intentionally trying to insinuate that the shooter was a Trump supporter, he could have phrased it much differently and more accurately. Of course, Kimmel also couldn't mislead the public as to whether or not Kirk's shooter was a Trump supporter until we know whether or not the shooter was indeed a Trump supporter or not. Nexstar Media Group and Sinclair Broadcast Group, who together owned 66 ABC affiliates, both announced that they would not be airing Jimmy Kimmel Live on their platforms. This represented almost 1/4 of ABC's national broadcast coverage. Sinclair even made the ridiculous threat that they wanted to force Kimmel to make a donation to Kirk's conservative political outreach organization, Turning Point USA. Of course, any facade that these actions were out of respect for Kirk was blown when it was revealed that Nexstar was getting ready to seek FCC approval for an acquisition of more than $6 billion of the media company Tegna. Sinclair wasn't innocent either, because the company had filed with the FCC to acquire several small market television stations. Brendan Carr also claimed on that same podcast that the FCC had, quote, a strong case for holding Kimmel, ABC, and network parent Disney accountable for spreading misinformation. It is at this point that it would become a Disney story when Disney chairman and CEO Bob Iger and Disney Entertainment co-chair Dana Walden showed a complete lack of fortitude. Disney announced that Jimmy Kimmel Live would be suspended indefinitely. For a lot of Disney fans, this was starting to look a lot like 2022. That year, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed into law the so-called Don't Say Gay bill. Initially under then Chairman and CEO Bob Chapek, Disney hesitated to take a firm stand against the bill. Eventually, after a ton of pressure from cast members and families who travel from more affluent states that tend to vote more progressively, Chairman of Disney Experiences Josh D'Amaro released a statement to CMs telling them that the company supported them. This was, for many in the company and out of the company, too little too late. Chapek was listening to the loudest voices, but he failed to take into consideration where people actually have the money for Disney Plus memberships and vacation packages. With Kimmel's indefinite suspension, complete with video of furniture and props being removed from the studio, it was starting to look like Bob Iger was going to make the same mistake. That is when Michael Eisner jumped on Twitter and showed some tremendous backbone. Eisner tweeted in a direct challenge to the man who took over the company after him, quote, "Where has all the leadership gone? If not for university presidents, law firm managing partners, and corporate chief executives standing up against bullies, who then will stand up for the First Amendment?" The suspending indefinitely of Jimmy Kimmel immediately after the chairman of the FCC's aggressive yet hollow threatening of the Disney company is yet another example of out-of-control intimidation. Maybe the Constitution should have said Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, except in one's political or financial self-interest. By the way, for the record, this ex-CEO finds Jimmy Kimmel very talented and funny. While there were other factors for sure, including strong words out of retirement from late-night talk show legend David Letterman, Kimmel was back on the air by Tuesday. In the 20 years since Eisner left Disney, he has been very, very slow to criticism. He would often show support for Disney's accomplishments, like the opening of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, but he didn't traditionally attack Iger or Chapek. If Eisner ever was going to make a stand and publicly admonish his protege, this was the time. It isn't that removing a late-night host is the biggest issue facing the country. It is, however, the one in which Bob Iger has the most control. Jimmy Kimmel got fired for saying something the current presidential administration didn't like. The president couldn't fire him, however. He needed Bob Iger to do his dirty work out of fear. Eisner was 100% correct. If the people with the most power in the country, the wealthy, elite, and yes, powerful, don't have the guts to stand up to the administration, who's going to stop them? Working people can fight for what is right. Fellow entertainers can fight for what is right. That being said, Bob Iger had the power to unilaterally fix things. Eisner called him out on it until he finally buckled and did the right thing. It is ridiculous to stan CEOs. It is ridiculous to stan billionaires. It is ridiculous to stan millionaires. We have discussed on this very podcast over the past year the many mistakes Michael Eisner made when he was in charge of the Walt Disney Company. Eisner's job was to raise stock prices for Disney shareholders. Even when he came out of the woodwork to call out Bob Iger, it was easier for him to do it because he didn't have to worry about any retaliation the administration may have taken against the company. Still, Michael Eisner does have a reputation of not stepping down when the worst types of people tried to pressure him into buckling to hate. The first documented occurrence of gay days at Walt Disney World came during June of 1991. Of course, June being Pride Month, it seemed like the perfect opportunity for members of the LGBTQ+ community to organize an informal gathering at WDW in which everybody would wear red t-shirts. That first recorded gathering brought about 3,000 people celebrating, and most of them were from the Central Florida area. By 1995, estimates increased to over 10,000 gays and lesbians traveling for Gay Day at Disney. By 1998, a companion event was being held at Disneyland in Anaheim, California. In 2010, still 5 years before marriage equality became the law of the land, over 150,000 people, now consisting of LGBTQ+ people, their families, friends, and supporters, made their way to WDW for a 6-day gathering. Doug Swallow, who is credited as the founder of Gay Days, was surprised by the growth of the event. Quote, "I don't think at the time we had any anticipation of doing anything of this scale, or that it would have an influence on Disney making any decisions to benefit their own employees, or would influence the way they deal with outside groups trying to influence what they do." Swallow continued, quote, "I'm sure there was a little bit of, it'll be fun to see how Disney reacts to this, but it wasn't meant to be in your face." As you can imagine, many of the worst types of organizations tried to use this opportunity to get in front of microphones and, probably more importantly for them, raise money on the back of a controversy with Disney. The Southern Baptist Convention boycotted Disney for 8 years. The Florida Family Association had to join the grift by flying planes with banners allegedly warning families of gay events at Disney. This is when Michael Eisner showed his character. In an interview on CBS 60 Minutes, Eisner was asked about Gay Days. He replied, quote, "The homosexual organizations arrange that day themselves. We do not put up signs that say no blacks allowed, no Jews allowed, no homosexuals allowed. As long as they are discreet and handle themselves properly or dress properly, they're welcome in our doors, and I think it would be a travesty in this country to exclude anybody." In 2025, that might not sound like the biggest signal of support for the gay community, and the comments about dressing appropriately may even seem insulting, but it was an entirely different world at the time. These comments aren't proper. Like I said earlier, the CEO of a company is concerned about the shareholders. What Eisner did with this announcement, however, was state that he was going to treat members of the LGBTQ+ community like anybody else in the parks. As a Jewish person himself, Eisner was also showing signs of empathy by including a mention of Jews in his answer. This was a strong statement for the time. He even went further when confronting the organizations trying to use their hate to raise money off of Disney's name. Eisner said, quote, "We're large, and when somebody attacks us, it gets their agenda in the news." Michael Eisner called out the grift. He realized something that Bob Iger should have studied. These people aren't serious. They are using Disney as a way to keep their uneducated followers angry and sending in donations. If Disney gave in to them on gay days, they would have turned their focus on something else. It reminds me of a story I heard filmmaker Kevin Smith tell on a podcast recently. Earlier this year, Smith was touring his 1999 movie Dogma, originally scheduled to be released through Miramax, which was a part of the Walt Disney Company. Dogma was bombarded by protests in 1999. The movie, which was a comedy that dealt with many aspects of Catholic theology, was insanely controversial upon its original release. It was protested to the point that it would end up not being released through Miramax so that Disney could keep its distance from the film. This year, however, without Disney attached to the movie, Kevin Smith only saw one lonely protester the entire tour. These companies want to use Disney's prestige, and I say companies because a lot of the times they couch themselves as charities or religious organizations, but they aren't that. They are using Disney's prestige as a national brand to get headlines. As a Catholic myself, I love Dogma. There was nothing about the movie that would offend somebody who is Catholic unless you are weary of raunchy language. Eisner's words were also followed by direct action. On January 1st of 1996, the Walt Disney Company, under Eisner's leadership, started providing health coverage for partners of their gay and lesbian cast members. For years, Disney was famous for its 4 keys of safety, courtesy, show, and efficiency. In 2020, Disney added a 5th key of inclusion. This was years after Eisner's tenure, and it wasn't specifically addressing the LGBTQ+ community, but that was certainly a part of the addition. All of that progress can be traced back to the time Michael Eisner sat on national television and affirmed that Disney would not be the kind of company to discriminate in an effort to appeal to the worst types of people. Embracing gay days and embracing the LGBTQ+ community has not just been the right moral decision, but it has proven to be the best economic decision. As more and more LGBTQ+ couples are welcoming kids into their families, and same-sex marriage has been legal for a decade now, pro-gay policies actually are starting to fit in more and more with Disney's family-friendly reputation. Disney also has a large percentage of LGBTQ+ cast members, as we witnessed with the backlash to Don't Say Gay. Inclusion of people with disabilities, people of color, and even people who have special dietary needs has become a huge focus for the company. They can always do better, and they will disappoint us again in the future many times. Still, Michael Eisner started the company on the right trajectory. With everything that is happening in the world, it can't just be working people fighting for what is right. We need people with power to show up, especially when they have a particular knowledge of that subject. When Michael Eisner called out Bob Iger, it had an impact. When Michael Eisner said that he wouldn't listen to Southern Baptists and he would allow gay days to continue unimpeded in the parks, these things matter. This has been episode 245 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. In the next few weeks, we will have a bunch of really great topics for you. Jeff Gordon, one of the nicest members of the Disney fan community, is going to be joining us to talk about his visits to every Disney park around the globe. We will talk about Tokyo Disney Sea, Paris's version of Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, and other topics from the international parks. I'm working on finding some time to record with my regular co-host Sarah Says. We're going to be talking about how Disney finds ways to waste your time on vacation, and we'll be going over some rare character meet and greets throughout the years. She met some really obscure characters in her early years at Disneyland, and I have found myself interacting with unusual characters in Walt Disney World. Of course, Maz will be back on the show soon as well. We're going to be talking about Disney's billion-dollar busts. I will definitely have to do more explaining what that topic means. And we want to go over the movie and television show announcements from Destination D23 from earlier this year. Please make sure that you are subscribed to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel. We have been getting so many views and listens to our podcast episodes, but I want to make sure that our videos are also getting recognition. Dropping likes and positive comments on videos and podcast episodes will really help us. We are about to reach 250 episodes, and you need to know that this has been a labor of love for us. We will be back next Thursday. Until then, have a great week.